You and a team of strangers on a bus traveling at 60 miles per hour have 72 hours to conceive, build, and launch a startup. Greetings, everyone. It's Friday, February 21, 2014, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mandela. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. Up to the Tech Talk, an experiment that has led to a growing international community and an exclusive network of doers and thinkers that participants can leverage for the rest of their lives, all united by the shared experience of the Startup Bus, an entrepreneurial ecosystem created through unique experiences unlike any other, a community-run organization designed specifically to empower its growing population to create change in the world and disrupt the status quo. A once-in-a-lifetime adventure that will transform you to unite with the people you meet and the experiences you have in a week-long expedition traveling on a bus for 72 hours while competing to conceive, build, and launch a startup. Find out how you can participate as we meet Alice Nigg, who currently leads marketing and events at the New York Technology Council. She competed on the 2013 Startup Bus and is a 2014 co-conductor for this year's event. And Nate Cooper, consultant in New York City, where he has established himself within the city's tech and entrepreneurial community, writing on the subjects of business strategy, and is deeply embedded in the New York tech scene. Nate was also a participant on a prior Startup Bus adventure and is also a co-conductor for this year's happening. Start the journey that never ends as we find out more from Alice Nigg and Nate Cooper, co-conductors of the 2014 Startup Bus. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Alice, Nate, welcome to Tech Talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We often, a lot of our listeners will know that we get a great opportunity to go horizontally across every kind of industry segment, enterprise segment that there is. The commonality, obviously, is technology, without any question. But it's a rare opportunity that we get a chance to talk to a different community, a completely different community, as we've introduced both you and Nate and Alice. I think it would be unfortunate if I didn't take advantage of an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the scene in New York as far as the technology community is concerned. I'll throw it at you, Alice. Let me just give us just a brief insight.
So the startup community in New York City is thriving. I think it's growing at a fast pace, and we have an organization called the Startup Bus that we feel are really driving the startup and tech scene in New York.
Okay, so is there part of the technology community there? Do you guys have organizations, startup organizations? We've got several now that have started up here in Atlanta over the last few years, things like Tech Village and other incubators. I'm going to assume it's the same thing. That's a lot of percolating of new ideas and new innovation. Nate, is that something you can give us some insight to?
Yeah, so I'm an educator in technology here in New York. Just knowing from the number of schools that have opened up in the past year training people on technology, it's just been insane. I went freelance 3 years ago to make my living as a tech trainer, and with things like Flatiron School, General Assembly, which is sort of growing nationally and internationally, is one indicator. There's also things like Techstars, obviously.
Yeah.
The New York Tech Meetup is the largest meetup of any kind in the world, and it's actually its own nonprofit organization, with several thousand members strong, and it happens monthly here in New York. So I'd say there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff going on with technology here.
Well, Alice, you mentioned the Startup Bus, and that's something that we definitely want to talk about today. Pretty exciting. Give us an insight. I think there's probably a lot of our listeners who are somewhat knowledgeable of it, but I got a feeling that a lot of them are not. So what is the Startup Bus?
So Startup Bus is a global community-driven organization, and we're known for producing what some say is the most intense startup competition in the world. We started 5 years ago in San Francisco, and we now have annual competitions in Europe, Africa, and North America, which is coming up in March. So what happens is we take talented developers, designers, and marketeers from cities across North America. This year we have 8, including Mexico and Canada, for a 72-hour road trip to Texas. In those 3 days, they will conceive, build, and launch a fully functioning product, then pitch their startups to a panel of industry experts, and only one team will win. It sounds crazy, and it is, but it's also a life-changing experience for most people who participate.
Well, it's fresh. You know, the reality of the situation is that the tipping point from analog to digital happened a long time ago, and the rapid, literally unstoppable change in the evolution of technology with clouds and apps and now high-speed connectivity, cognitive computing. I mean, it's almost an endless case where opportunity and innovation is everywhere. So it's like, I guess, crowdsourcing in a more simplistic way. It's another approach to the issue of where do you find startups, where do you find innovation, where do you find ideas. Nate, why should people ride on the bus? I mean, what's the critical benefit from it?
Well, I think as you just pointed out, you know, there's a lot that goes into running a company, and so you know, we really think of Startup Bus, or at least my experience on it, was sort of like a baby incubator that happens to be traveling at 16 miles an hour, following the speed limit. So, you know, in terms of what you get out of the experience and why you should ride it, it's just a sort of that idea of learning business acumen, understanding what goes into a technology product, how to gain traction, you know, while in this sort of hyper-aware, hyper-pressure environment that sort of pushes you to a limit. And, you know, I mentioned I was an educator. In a classroom, you know, you see, you know, light bulbs go off. I mean, this is something where light bulbs are going off every hour, you know, as they're sort of set to move.
Absolutely fascinating, really. I'm thinking the collaboration and no borders, literally, because you're driving past a lot of state borders, so there's no limitation either geographically or from the imagination. Now, if I'm understanding it correctly, both Alice and you, Nate, have been on the ride. Alice, from your perspective, what did you both learn or gain from riding on the bus?
I think the biggest takeaway for us is how to build a startup. Nate and I came from the corporate world, and we both had a vague idea of what it takes to build a startup, but no real knowledge or experience beyond what was in our heads. And that changed when we got on the bus. We learned about what Nate had mentioned, infrastructure, how to gain traction, how to work in time constraints, and it really taught us that you can do a lot with very little. You don't need an MBA. You don't need a lot of money in order to get something off the ground.
Well, I got a feeling that it's somewhat of a surreal experience, a lot of one-of-a-kind adventures, and when you're sitting in an environment where the light bulbs are going off the way, Nate, you're describing, and with the intensity, Alice, that you're talking about, I got a feeling that there's got to be some kind of post-trauma shock when you come back to reality, Nate. Just what happens when you return home after a journey like this?
You know, so what's interesting, so Mike Caprio, who's pretty embedded in the New York tech community here, he was my conductor, and I think he described the situation best as far as the Startup Bus, which is that it's sort of like a secret society within tech. And that's not to say, you know, we're intentionally hidden. You know, we're very open to meeting all kinds of people and talking and promoting technology in all of the regions where Startup Bus happens. But you know, what happens when you sort of go through this experience with other people is it's really bonding.
Sure.
And
I would imagine that.
You really connect with others.
So, I mean, it's like an alumni situation after that, almost a fraternity, sorority kind of experience where you've, you know, engaged it together, get to know each other on a level of interest that is rare, and the atmosphere is really rare. Before we get into the criteria for choosing, because I really think a lot of our listeners would want to know how you go about choosing people for the bus. Give us, either one of you, kind of take this one and see if you can help us. We've got a lot of listeners who generally understand the concept. So what happens is you all meet in a single city. You pick each other up along the way. I mean, give us a little maybe granular look about how the process kind of starts and then goes to the finish. It doesn't have to be every detail, but a general overview, because I think from my perspective, I get it, but it's still kind of confusing. So maybe kind of clear that up. Either one of you would be glad to take that question on.
Sure. So the North America competition is happening on March 2nd, and we have 8 cities. People can apply for those 8 cities. They include San Francisco, Seattle, Florida, Nashville, Kansas City, New York City, Mexico, and Canada. So you apply, we interview you, and if you're a good fit, you would be either a developer, a designer, or someone with a really great marketing, business development background. Once you're chosen, you get on your bus from the city that you had applied for, and you take a trip to Texas. In those 3 days, you will work on your product, and then once we get to Texas, you will pitch it.
Now, is it when you say the city you've applied for, is it tied to the city, or can I pick a city and say be a developer from Atlanta that wants the experience, so they pick a city and select themselves from that, or is it isolated, say, from a geographic border standpoint?
No, it's wherever you want to go. So in the past, we've had people that would come from Washington, D.C. or from San Francisco, and they would ride on the New York City bus. Okay,
gotcha. All right, so that sounds pretty okay. I guess one last question would have to be the criteria themselves. I mean, I know you've mentioned it in a general form, but, Nate, what would be the real hardcore criteria for choosing people for the bus? I mean, you mentioned, in effect, that you submit information and then a selection process is made. What are you looking for?
Right. So it's about finding a good balance between the three different skill sets, with a heavy lean towards people who have hardcore tech skills, because part of the competition is actually building a product in the 3 days. Even though there is a pitch involved, a lot of the people who we have as hackers have experience pitching, and have sold companies. And I think some of the things, this is our first year conducting, but one of the things that Alice and I were looking at in terms of determining who would fit on the bus is just, what's going to be a good mix? Who's going to be someone who's going to learn? Who's going to be someone who's going to excel at one thing or the other? And who's going to not want to kill each other in 3 days on a bus? So, you have to look for people who have that sense of adventure and can handle pressure, but also, really have a deep skill set.
Really exciting, really exciting. One last point, just out of curiosity, what would have been some of the products that have come out of the prior bus trips? When you created a product, what were some of the concepts that came out of it?
So, Alice, last year, why don't you talk about what won? I can tell you that the year that I took the bus, there was a company called Cerealize, which did customized breakfast cereal. My product was a company to encourage global happiness, which is no longer in active service. We got about 10,000 uses in 3 days. Alice, do you want to talk about last year?
Sure. So the winner from last year was called Career Mob. They had built a job hunting platform for veterans. So veterans who are leaving, they wanted to help them come back into their regular life and into the workforce by giving them, helping them find opportunities that are available. What really helped them win was really great UI design, and the concept was stellar, and the judges really took to that.
Okay, so you've got my interest. I want to learn more. I may even want to apply. Either one of you want to give us some contact information? If I'm interested in getting involved in the Startup Bus, how do I make contact?
Sure. You can email either one of us. My email is alice@startupbus.com, and Nate is at nate@startupbus.com.
Okay,
or
so
you can tweet us at StartupBusNYC.
I'm sorry, I kind of stepped on that comment. What were you saying again? Where to go?
Sure. You can also find us on Twitter, where our handle is StartupBusNYC.
StartupBusNYC. Alice, Nate, sounds like fun. I guess you guys, as you mentioned a couple of times, you're the co-conductors. There's an old 60s, 70s song about a magic bus. Have fun on the magic bus. It sounds really exciting. I'm hoping a lot of people from Atlanta get interested and want to find out more information. And